What is going on, everyone? It's Eric coming at you from just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And today we're going to be discussing the draft pick trade that would eventually lead to the New Orleans Saints selecting Ricky Williams. Now, this, of course, happened during the 1999 NFL draft. So, obviously, you notice I have different markers here. This was a longer trade, and I actually had tried to do it with my normal markers, but they were just too big, so I couldn't fit everything. So I had to buy the smaller one, so I apologize that it's a little harder to see. I have to zoom in pretty much all the way to be able to show you guys, but trust me, it's worth it. Now, the Ricky Williams trade has been a trade I wanted to do since I announced the trade breakdown series. It's one I've always had in mind. There's another one I have in mind too that's football that we'll get to in the future, but the Ricky Williams one was the one I wanted to do. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. And essentially, the background to this trade was the Saints coach at the time, who was Hall of Famer Mike Ditka. He was infatuated with a college running back named Ricky Williams. Williams had a good attitude, and Williams was one heck of a player. And everyone was like, okay, you know what? Ricky Williams is a good player. Now, the top three teams all needed quarterbacks at that time. I don't remember who the third was, but I know it was Cleveland picked first, Philadelphia picked second. And the fourth team said, no, we want to keep our picks. We got to keep the number 4 pick. But Washington sat there at 5. So Ditka calls Washington and says, hey guys, listen, we really want this pick. So we're going to trade you. We're going to trade you a good amount of our picks here. We're going to trade you our first round pick, which is 12th overall, pick number 71, pick number 107, pick number 144, 179, and 218. So their whole draft class, what was left in their whole draft class, excluding the second round pick, which they had already traded away, as well as a first and third round pick in the 2000 NFL draft. As if taking their whole draft class wasn't enough, the Saints threw in 2 more picks. Not only picks, but a first and a third. So obviously, Washington's getting quantity, while the Saints believed they were getting quality. How did it work out? Well, we're going to start off with the Saints, of course. They selected Ricky Williams. So, how did Ricky do? Ricky Williams had a solid 3-year career in New Orleans. He didn't do amazing his first year, but his second and third years, he actually tops 1,000 yards. He wasn't the MVP that the team had hoped he would be, and he was still one heck of a player, but unfortunately, the team had to, they fired Mike Ditka because the team wasn't doing great. So the new regime comes in and they're like, we don't need this running back. Let's get assets for him. So what they do is they end up flipping Ricky Williams to the Miami Dolphins. So it didn't happen during the 2002 NFL draft, but it was easier for me to write that. So they ship Ricky Williams along with the 114th pick in the 2002 draft to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for picks 25, 125, and a 2003 first-round pick courtesy of the Dolphins. So, obviously, we're going to stick with New Orleans here. So, with the 25th pick in the 2002 draft, the Saints would select defensive end Charles Grant. So, Charles Grant, he showed immense potential as a rookie. He looked very good. And he becomes a full-time starter by the next season, 2003. Now, 2004... he has a great year for the Saints. He leads all defensive linemen in tackles, and he recorded 10.5 sacks. That's pretty impressive. Now, what ends up happening is he has a good 2006, but he didn't do great in 2005. He has a bad year in 2007, and he does okay in 2008 and 2009, but at that point, they can't justify paying the man the contract that he was signed to, so they end up cutting him. All in all, a pretty good pick. With the 125th pick, the Saints would select cornerback Keo Craver. So Craver ends up spending 2 years in New Orleans as a backup before leaving the team. Now that 2003 first-round pick becomes the 17th overall selection. Now the Saints, sticking true to character, end up trading the 17th selection along with the 18th and 54th to the Arizona Cardinals in exchange for picks 6, 37, and 102. So with those 3 picks, they would select with the 6th overall selection defensive tackle Jonathan Sullivan. who's one of the few people I've seen whose name's Jonathan still has an H in the John part. Now, Jonathan Sullivan, he spends 3 lackluster seasons in New Orleans. He just doesn't look good, and they end up trading him. So they trade him to the New England Patriots in exchange for wide receiver Bethel Johnson. Now, Bethel Johnson, he shows a lack of motivation, and he ends up suffering a knee injury. So the team just says, you know what, you weren't going to make the roster anyway, so they get rid of him. Now, with the 37th pick, the Saints would select offensive tackle John Stickhome. And Stickhome, he was a backup for his first 2 years. And then 2005, he misses the whole season due to a knee injury. But he ends up becoming a starter in 2006. And he's good. He's not an elite guy. He's not a Hall of Famer. But he's a good player. Now, he has a career year during the Super Bowl season 2009. And then he ends up getting cut after the 2010 season. For the first time in this video, we have a guy who made a Pro Bowl. He was a one-time Pro Bowler with the Saints. Now, the last pick that they got from Arizona was the 102nd pick. And with that pick, they would select guard Montre Holland. You're noticing a little bit of a theme here. A lot of defensive, fronts and secondary players and offensive linemen. Now, with Montre Holland, he was an average starter for 2 seasons. Now, he starts half of those games, so he appears in 32 games over 4 seasons before he ends up just leaving the team. So, believe it or not, that is everything that the Saints got. But here's the fun part, the Washington football team. So, with the 12th pick, they would end up trading the 12th pick, along with the 71st pick, and a few more, the 106th, 143rd, and their 2000 third-round pick. So they sent all of that to the Chicago Bears in exchange for the 7th overall pick. So with the 7th pick, the Washington team selected cornerback Champ Bailey. And Champ Bailey, oh man, he appears in all 80 possible games over 5 years for Washington. And he is just amazing. He records 18 interceptions over that time, and he really just proved to be a top corner in the league. Arguably one of the best corners of all time. Now, after those 5 seasons, he was holding out. He wanted more money, and they end up trading him. But that trade will be another video. I didn't have the space to do it. I probably could have, but at the time I didn't. I have that one already ready to be recorded, so we'll get to that in another one. But he gets traded to Denver in a blockbuster deal as well. Now, during his time in Washington, keep in mind, 5 seasons, he makes 4 Pro Bowls, and he's a 2-time second-team All-Pro. So, very impressive. They gave up a lot to get him, but they got themselves one heck of a player. Now, the 107th pick, remember, acquired from the Saints. Washington would select linebacker Nate Stimson. So, Stimson never plays in the NFL, period. The 144th selection ends up getting traded alongside the 40th selection to the Chicago Bears for pick number 37. So with the 37th pick, Washington would select offensive tackle John Jansen. And John Jansen becomes a valuable starter in his rookie season. Now, over his first 5 years, just like Champ Bailey, he would start every game possible, so 80 of a possible 80 games. And he ends up tearing his Achilles, missing all of the 2004 season, unfortunately. And then he comes back and has an elite 2005 season and a great 2006 season. But then he ends up breaking his ankle in 2007, the first game. And due to these injuries, he gets cut after the 2008 season. He is a 1-time second-team All-Pro. Now, the thing is, he was a right tackle. And as you know, right tackles don't get the recognition they deserve as a Pro Bowl. For Pro Bowl votes, everyone goes left tackle. So that's why he doesn't have any Pro Bowl appearances. Anyway, the 179th pick also gets traded, along with the 218th pick, to the Denver Broncos in exchange for the 165th. So with the 165th pick, the Washington team would select offensive tackle Derek Smith. And Derek Smith did not play in the NFL. So now we get to these last 2 picks that the Washington team got. The 2001st and 3rd from New Orleans. Now, those picks would become the 2nd and 64th overall. With the 2nd pick, Washington would select linebacker LeVar Arrington. And LeVar Arrington, he has a good rookie season, but he ends up really breaking out during his second year. And he has 2 more great seasons before knee injuries would hamper his last 2 years in Washington. Then he ends up leaving the team via free agency to a big contract. I believe it was with the Giants, but it never panned out for him. So he was a 3-time Pro Bowler and a 2-time second-team All-Pro. Now, the 64th overall selection would become cornerback Lloyd Harrison. And Lloyd Harrison only appears in 2 games before being cut by Washington. So that is everything that Washington and New Orleans got out of this deal. But obviously, there were lots of other teams involved. So how did they all do? So we're going to start with Miami just because they got Ricky. So Ricky Williams, oh boy, he's a fun story. He could get a player bio if I really wanted to do one for him. So he has an elite first season in Miami. He led the NFL in rushing that year. And then he has another very strong season the next year, 2003. Now, drug problems start to plague him, and he ends up retiring before the 2004 season due to a failed drug test. But he comes back. He, comes back from his retirement for 2005, and he has a solid year in 2005, but he was a backup. Now, he gets suspended for all of the 2006 season due to another failed drug test. Now, he would only appear in 1 game during 2007 because he wasn't ready to play. He comes back and he gets hurt. But he has a decent season as a backup in 2008 and, the start of 2009. But then the second half of the 2009 season, Williams ends up taking the starting role, and he ends the season with 1,000 yards. Now, he becomes a backup again in 2010. At this point, remember, he's old. He's a running back. But one of the most polarizing players in the NFL, he left the team. Fact is, he was a 1-time Pro Bowler, 1-time first-team All-Pro, and he led the NFL in rushing once during his brief stint in Miami. His long stint in Miami, I should say. But remember, a lot of people didn't like him because of the drugs, the PEDs. They're like, okay. Now, the other guy that they got with the 114th selection is tight end Randy McMichael. So McMichael starts all 80 of a possible 80 games over 5 years, and he was a strong receiving tight end. Now, he had a very good 2004 season before kind of falling down in 05 and 06, and then he gets cut. So, yeah, all in all, Miami did pretty good with what they got, too. So, let's discuss Chicago, because they got 2 separate trades with Washington. So, in this first trade here, they got the 12th overall selection, which they used on quarterback Cade McNown. So, Cade McNown struggled whenever he starts for 2 years for the Bears before they would end up trading him. The 71st pick they would use on wide receiver Dwayne Bates. And Dwayne Bates, he was a backup special teamer for 3 years before he left the team via free agency. Different times, remember, different times. The 106th selection would become linebacker Warwick Holdman. So Warwick Holdman, he's a decent starter for 5 years, and he has a career year in 2001, but then he walks via free agency. The 143rd pick would become offensive tackle Jerry Wisney. And Wisney, he's a backup for 2 years before being cut. Now, they also acquired a 2000 third-round pick, and just to keep it easier, I put it right here. So that pick would become the 87th overall pick, and they would use that on tight end Dustin Lyman. So Dustin Lyman, he was an okay player for 5 years before leaving the team. Not great, but not bad. Now, the other 2 picks that they got, remember, they traded 37 for 40 and 144. The 40th pick ends up getting traded away. We're not going to discuss that. And the 144th pick would become linebacker Kari Samuel. So Kari Samuel, he's just, a 2-year special teamer before he also just gets cut. So Chicago didn't do too much with all their assets they acquired. Denver. So remember, they traded 165 for 179 in 2018. So the 179th pick, Denver would select tight end, fullback hybrid Desmond Clark. And Desmond Clark was a decent backup for 3 years. Now, with the 218th pick, they went with tight end Billy Miller. And Billy Miller had a quiet 3 years before leaving the team. So, lastly, we have 2 more teams here. I'm going to discuss the Patriots just to get them out of the way. Defensive tackle Jonathan Sullivan. Remember, they traded Bethel Johnson for him. Just like Johnson in New Orleans, Sullivan in New England did not work out. and he ends up getting cut due to off-the-field concerns. I forget if it was a DUI or something like that, but they cut him. Lastly, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who, remember, traded 6, 37, and 102 for 17, 18, and 54. So the 17th selection, they would select wide receiver Bryant Johnson, who would spend 5 years in the city as a wide receiver 3 before leaving the team. With the 18th selection, they would select defensive end linebacker Calvin Pace. So Calvin Pace immediately becomes a starter at defensive end, and he struggles. So they end up moving him to linebacker after 3 years, and the change worked out for him very well. So he breaks out, and in 2007 he breaks out, and then he signs a big contract with the Jets. The last pick that they got was the 54th overall selection, which they used on wide receiver Anquan Bolden. And Bolden was a hit. So he starts off his career with a bang, with 217 receiving yards in his first ever NFL game. That is an NFL record to date. So he has a very good rookie year, and he continues to develop as a true wide receiver 1, really outshadowing Bryant Johnson. And, he just has another great 2005. He becomes a consistent top receiver for another 4 years before he himself gets traded. So he was a 3-time Pro Bowler while on the Cardinals, along with being Rookie of the Year. But that right there was the Ricky Williams trade. A lot of stuff happened here, a lot of moving parts. Again, this was a trade I've wanted to do for a while. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, Ricky Williams trade, which occurred during the 1999 NFL Draft. Again, a lot of moving parts. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day.